The bitter Alaskan wind howled through the ancient pine trees as thick snowflakes blanketed the frozen wilderness. Deep in the Denali forest, a massive grizzly bear named Cloudwalker trudged through the knee-deep snow, her powerful muscles working against the storm. She had awakened early from her winter sleep, driven by an unexplainable urge that pulled her from her warm den. Her thick brown fur, touched with silvery tips that gave her her name, was already covered in frost as she pushed forward through the growing blizzard. Cloudwalker's keen nose caught something on the wind, a scent that seemed impossible in this frozen wasteland. It was different from the usual smells of pine sap and snow-covered earth. This scent was warm, alive, and completely out of place. The mother bear had lost her own cubs to a harsh winter 2 seasons ago, and something about this strange smell awakened those old protective instincts deep within her. As she followed the mysterious scent, the sound of the wind changed. Between the gusts, she heard something that made her massive head turn sharply, a sound that no bear should ever hear in the depths of an Alaskan winter. It was the weak, muffled cry of a human baby. Cloudwalker's heart began to pound as memories of her lost cubs flooded back. The cry came again, fainter this time, nearly lost in the howling storm. The bear quickened her pace, her huge paws breaking through the crusty snow as she followed both scent and sound. Whatever was making that cry wouldn't survive long in this cold. As she rounded a massive fallen pine, Cloudwalker froze. There, half buried in the snow, was a small bundle wrapped in what had once been thick blankets. A tiny hand, blue with cold, reached out from the wrappings, moving weakly as another cry, barely audible now, drifted up from the bundle. Cloudwalker approached the bundle cautiously, her massive head lowered to examine the tiny form. The baby's cries had grown so weak they were barely whispers in the howling wind. Around the bundle, the bear could smell traces of fear, metal and smoke, signs of human presence that made her hackles rise. But these scents were hours old, gradually being erased by the relentless snow. The mother bear's mind flashed back to the terrible night when she lost her cubs. The same bitter cold had crept into their den while she was searching for food, and she had returned too late. That grief had carved itself deep into her heart, and now, looking at this helpless human cub, something powerful stirred within her. The ancient instincts that told her to avoid humans battled with the overwhelming urge to protect this dying infant. Cloudwalker gently nosed the bundle, and the baby's eyes fluttered open, eyes as blue as the summer sky she remembered from her high mountain wanderings. The infant's skin had taken on the pale, translucent quality that the bear recognized from the still forms of her cubs. Without a second thought, she carefully gripped the blankets with her teeth and lifted the bundle. The baby let out another weak cry, but Cloudwalker could feel the tiny body trembling violently against the bitter cold. The bear's den lay nearly a mile away, and the storm was growing stronger with each passing minute. She knew the chances of the infant surviving such a journey were slim, but leaving it meant certain death. Cloudwalker cradled the bundle close to her chest, using her massive body to shield it from the worst of the wind. As she began the arduous journey back, her keen ears picked up new sounds carried on the wind, distant shouts, and the mechanical growl of human machines. The bear hesitated, torn between her instinct to flee from humans and her desperate need to save this tiny life. The baby's trembling had grown weaker, and Cloudwalker could sense its failing strength. The mechanical sounds were getting closer, but they were coming from the wrong direction, away from her den, away from warmth and safety. The bear made her decision. Holding the bundle even closer, she plunged into the deepening snow, heading for her den as the storm closed in around them like a white curtain. Every step was a battle against the elements. The wind cut through even Cloudwalker's thick fur, and ice formed on her whiskers. She could feel the baby's heartbeat growing fainter against her chest. The bear's muscles burned with effort as she forced her way through snowdrifts that now reached her shoulders. The familiar landmarks that would guide her home were disappearing in the whiteout conditions, but she pressed on, trusting her instincts and the memory of countless journeys through these woods. In the distance, a wolf's howl echoed through the trees, followed by another closer call. Cloudwalker's head snapped up, her nostrils flaring as she caught the scent of the pack. They were hunting, driven by the same desperate hunger that had awakened her early from hibernation. The bear knew she couldn't outrun them, not in these conditions, not while carrying such precious cargo. She would have to make a stand if they found her, protect this infant as fiercely as she would have protected her own cubs. Cloudwalker's muscles tensed as she heard the wolf pack drawing closer. The baby stirred weakly in its blankets, and she pulled it even tighter against her warm fur. The storm had created a thick white wall around them, but through the swirling snow, yellow eyes began to appear. The wolves emerged from the darkness one by one, their gray forms ghost-like in the storm. Their leader, a battle-scarred male with one torn ear, stepped forward, his hungry gaze fixed on the bundle in Cloudwalker's protection. The mother bear recognized this pack. They had clashed before over territory during the autumn salmon runs. But this encounter was different. The wolves were desperate, their ribs showing through their winter coats, and Cloudwalker could smell their determination. The pack slowly spread out, trying to surround her. She counted 7 wolves, more than she had ever faced alone. The baby's faint whimper drew a low growl from the pack leader, and Cloudwalker saw his muscles bunch in preparation to attack. In that moment, the bear made a decision that would change everything. Instead of rising to her full height to fight as the wolves expected, she turned and crashed through the trunk of a hollow tree she had spotted earlier. The rotted wood gave way under her massive weight, creating a temporary shelter. Cloudwalker quickly placed the baby deep inside the trunk, then spun to face the advancing pack. Now she could fight without fear of crushing the infant. The first wolf lunged for her throat, but Cloudwalker's massive paw sent him flying into a snowbank. 2 more attacked from the sides, their teeth seeking purchase through her thick fur. The bear roared, the sound echoing through the frozen forest like thunder. She fought with all the fury of a mother protecting her young, just as she wished she could have done for her cubs 2 seasons ago. The wolves were experienced hunters, but they had never faced such desperate strength. The battle seemed to last forever in the howling storm. Blood stained the snow crimson, both hers and the wolves'. The pack leader made one final attempt, leaping for her exposed flank, but Cloudwalker caught him midair and threw him against a tree trunk. The sickening crack that followed silenced the forest for a moment. The remaining wolves backed away, their survival instincts finally overcoming their hunger. One by one, they melted back into the storm, leaving their leader's broken body behind. Cloudwalker was breathing heavily, steam rising from her fur in the freezing air. Cuts and bites covered her body, but none were deep enough to slow her down. She quickly returned to the hollow tree, her heart pounding with fear that the fight had taken too long. The baby lay motionless in its blankets, and for one horrible moment Cloudwalker thought she had failed again. Then she saw the tiny chest rise and fall with a shallow breath. The bear gently picked up the bundle once more, knowing she had to reach her den soon. The baby's breathing was growing weaker, and Cloudwalker could smell the dangerous sweetness of severe cold setting into its small body. The storm had reached its peak now, turning the world into a blank canvas of white. The bear pushed forward, using her bulk to plow through snowdrifts taller than herself. Each step was agony with her injuries, but she refused to slow down. Through the curtain of snow, Cloudwalker finally spotted the rocky outcropping that marked her den's entrance. But something made her pause. There was a new scent on the wind, one that made her fur stand on end. Human scents were approaching from multiple directions, along with the growl of their machines. They were searching in a pattern, drawing closer to her position. The bear looked down at the precious bundle in her care, then at her den's entrance. She had to make another choice, one that would either save this infant's life or condemn them both. Cloudwalker's keen ears picked up the sound of human voices carried on the wind, growing closer with each passing minute. The baby stirred in its blankets, letting out a cry that was slightly stronger than before. The brief shelter in the hollow tree had helped preserve some of its warmth. The bear looked at her den entrance, knowing it would provide the fastest shelter from the storm, but her instincts warned her that leading humans to her sanctuary would mean she could never return. The search parties were spreading out in a way that told her they were tracking something, and Cloudwalker realized they must be following the trail of blood she had left after the wolf fight. The bear made her decision. Instead of entering her den, she turned eastward, toward a place she had discovered during her summer wanderings. It was farther away, perhaps too far given the baby's weakened state, but it offered something her den could not. A chance to save the infant without sacrificing her home. Cloudwalker remembered the hot springs that bubbled up through the rocks there, creating small caves that stayed warm even in the deepest winter. The journey would be treacherous, but she could no longer hear the baby shivering. A sign she knew meant death was approaching swiftly. She pressed forward through the storm, her powerful legs trembling with exhaustion. The wounds from the wolf attack had frozen over in the bitter cold, pulling painfully with each step. Cloudwalker could smell her own blood mixing with the scent of the approaching humans, and she knew she had to move faster. The mechanical growls of their machines echoed through the trees, bouncing off the snow-laden branches until it seemed to come from every direction. The bear's path took her along a frozen riverbed, where the snow was slightly shallower but the footing treacherous. Beneath the fresh powder lay a sheet of ice that could crack at any moment. Cloudwalker tested each step carefully, knowing that a single mistake would mean the end for both her and the infant. The baby had grown disturbingly still in its blankets, and only the occasional weak movement against her chest told her it still lived. Halfway across the river, Cloudwalker heard the ice groan beneath her weight. In the same moment, the beam of a bright light cut through the swirling snow behind her. Human voices shouted in excitement, far too close. The bear looked desperately for an escape route, but the riverbank on either side rose in steep cliffs. The ice cracked again, a sound like a gunshot in the storm. Cloudwalker had seconds to make yet another impossible choice. With careful movements that belied her massive size, she lowered herself onto her belly, spreading her weight across the weakening ice. Using her front paws, she began to pull herself forward inch by inch, cradling the baby against her chest with one leg. The humans were getting closer. She could hear their boots crunching on the snow and ice. The bright beams of their lights danced across the riverbed, searching. Just as the first light was about to reveal her position, Cloudwalker's paw broke through a thin patch of ice. The freezing water that rushed up sent panic through her body, but she fought against her instincts to thrash. Instead, she rolled slightly to one side, keeping the baby above the water while she used her powerful legs to kick against the bottom of the river. The current tried to pull her under the ice, but Cloudwalker's determination gave her strength she didn't know she had. Her claws found purchase on a submerged log, and she pulled herself forward with a mighty heave. The baby was still dry, but Cloudwalker's fur was quickly freezing into a solid mass of ice. The humans had reached the riverbank now. She could smell their confusion as they tried to understand the scene before them. The bear knew she had only moments before they spotted her. With the last of her strength, she lunged for a narrow crack in the cliff face, one that would have been impossible to spot if she hadn't remembered it from her summer explorations. It was a tight fit, but Cloudwalker forced her way inside just as the light swept across where she had been. The narrow passage twisted upward, away from the river and the searching humans. Cloudwalker could barely squeeze through in some places, her frozen fur scraping against the rock walls. But she could feel warm air flowing from somewhere above, and that gave her hope. The baby stirred again, making a sound that was neither cry nor whimper, but told the bear that time was running out. She pushed onward through the darkness, following the warmth, praying she had made the right choice. The narrow passage gradually widened into a small cavern where warm air rose from cracks in the rocky floor. Cloudwalker's frozen muscles trembled with relief as she emerged into the space. Her bear's nose told her this cave had never been visited by humans. It smelled only of stone, minerals, and the strange warmth that bubbled up from deep underground. Small pools of steaming water dotted the cavern floor, creating a humid warmth that already began to thaw her ice-covered fur. The baby moved more noticeably now in response to the warmth, its tiny fingers flexing against the frozen blankets. Cloudwalker gently placed the bundle on a dry patch of stone near one of the warm pools, using her claws with impossible delicacy to peel away the ice-crusted outer layers. The infant's skin had taken on a frightening bluish tinge, but as the warm air enveloped it, color slowly began returning to its face. For the first time, Cloudwalker got a clear look at the human cub she had risked everything to save. It was smaller than she had realized, perhaps only a few months old. The baby had a thick tuft of black hair and features that reminded the bear of the indigenous people she sometimes saw fishing in the summer months. Around its neck, partially hidden by the blankets, hung a carved wooden pendant in the shape of a bear. Cloudwalker's heart ached as she remembered how her own cubs had been this small, this helpless. The baby's eyes fluttered open, deep brown now, not blue as they had appeared in the storm, and locked onto Cloudwalker's face without fear. The bear's own injuries screamed for attention. The wolf bites had begun to thaw painfully, and her dip in the frozen river had sapped more strength than she could afford to lose. But the sound of human voices echoing faintly through the passage spurred her back to alertness. They had found the crack in the cliff face. Cloudwalker could hear them debating whether someone could fit through, their voices bouncing off the stone walls. She knew she had to make a decision about what to do when they arrived, and they would arrive, their determination to find the lost baby evident in their tireless pursuit. The infant began to cry then, stronger than before, its tiny voice echoing off the cavern walls. The sound filled Cloudwalker with conflicting emotions, joy that the baby was growing stronger, fear that the noise would lead the humans right to them, and a deep, aching maternal instinct that made her want to never let this small creature out of her sight. She gently nuzzled the baby, and to her surprise, it reached up with a tiny hand to touch her nose, just as her cubs had once done. The voices in the passage grew louder, accompanied by the scraping of equipment against stone. Cloudwalker could smell at least 3 different humans making their way through the narrow tunnel. The baby's cries had turned to soft coos as it played with the bear's sensitive nose, completely unaware of the dangerous situation. In that moment, Cloudwalker realized that her next choice would define not only her own fate, but would ripple through this infant's life forever. She heard a gasp as the first human emerged into the cavern, a woman bundled in thick winter gear, her face marked by exhaustion and frozen tears. The woman froze at the sight before her, a massive grizzly bear, covered in wounds and ice, hovering protectively over a cooing baby. Cloudwalker saw the woman's hand move toward the weapon at her belt, then stop as she truly took in the scene. The baby chose that moment to let out a happy gurgle, its tiny hand still pressed against the bear's nose. 2 more humans squeezed into the cavern, men carrying medical equipment and weapons, but like the woman, they stood transfixed by the impossible tableau before them. The only sounds were the gentle bubbling of the warm springs and the contented noises of the infant. Cloudwalker kept her eyes locked on the woman, recognizing in her the same desperate need to protect that she herself felt. Very slowly, the bear began to back away from the baby, every movement deliberate and gentle. She was giving them a choice, just as she had made so many choices to save this small life. The woman took a slow step forward, her hands now raised to show she meant no harm. Cloudwalker could smell the tears freezing on her face, tears of relief, fear, and something deeper. The baby continued making happy sounds, completely at ease in this extraordinary situation. One of the men whispered something about it being impossible, about how no infant could have survived such cold, but the woman silently shushed him, her eyes never leaving the bear's. "You protected him," the woman said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "You kept our little Dennehy alive." The name stirred something in Cloudwalker's memory. She had heard this word before, whispered by the indigenous elders during their summer fishing ceremonies. It meant brother of the north wind in their ancient language. The bear watched as the woman knelt down, still maintaining a respectful distance from both her and the baby. The warm cave air had completely thawed Cloudwalker's fur now, revealing the full extent of her injuries from the wolf fight. Blood matted her coat in several places, and she could feel the deep bite wounds beginning to throb as feeling returned to her frozen flesh. The second man had begun to radio for help, speaking rapidly about medical supplies and a rescue team, but the woman raised her hand for silence. She had noticed something that the others had missed, the wooden pendant around Denahi's neck, glowing with a faint pulsing light. "It's just like the stories my grandmother told," the woman breathed, recognition dawning in her eyes. "About the spirit bears who watch over lost children in the storm." As if in response to her words, the baby, Denahi, reached toward the glowing pendant with his tiny fingers. The carved wooden bear seemed to shimmer in the steam rising from the warm pools, casting dancing shadows on the cavern walls. Cloudwalker felt a strange sensation, as if ancient memories that didn't belong to her were stirring in her mind. The woman began to sing softly, an old song in the indigenous language that made Cloudwalker's ears prick forward. She knew this song. She had heard it carried on summer winds, drifting up from the valleys where the elders gathered. It was a song about the connection between the animal spirits and the human world, about the sacred bonds that formed in moments of greatest need. As the woman sang, Dennehy's pendant glowed brighter, illuminating the cave with a warm, golden light. Cloudwalker's wounds began to tingle, and to everyone's amazement, the bleeding slowly stopped. The bear felt strength flowing back into her tired muscles, driven by some power she didn't understand, but somehow recognized. The woman's song grew stronger, filling the cave with its ancient melody. Both men had fallen silent, witnessing something that defied their modern understanding of the world. Denahi laughed, a pure, bright sound that echoed off the cave walls and seemed to make the pendant's light pulse even stronger. Cloudwalker felt drawn to move forward rather than away, guided by an instinct older than memory. The woman continued singing as she carefully lifted Denahi into her arms, but instead of backing away from the bear, she stayed kneeling. Cloudwalker understood then. This was not goodbye. The pendant's light had forged a connection that would transcend this moment. The bear gently pressed her nose against Denahi's outstretched hand one last time, breathing in his scent to remember always. The woman's song came to an end, but its echo seemed to linger in the steam rising from the warm pools. "You'll always be his guardian," she said to Cloudwalker, tears flowing freely now. "The elders will add your story to their teachings. The spirit bear who defied winter itself to save a child of our people." A commotion from the passage announced the arrival of more humans, rescue workers with medical equipment and supplies. But before they could enter the cavern, Cloudwalker noticed a previously hidden opening high in the cave wall where the warm air seemed to be drawing her toward another passage. She gave Denahi and the woman one final look, seeing in their eyes the same understanding. Some bonds, once formed, never needed physical presence to remain strong. Cloudwalker made her way through the high passage, which spiraled upward through the mountain's heart. Steam from underground springs had worn smooth paths through the rock over countless centuries, creating a natural corridor that seemed made for her escape. As she climbed higher, she could still feel the warmth of Denahi's tiny hand on her nose, and the pendant's golden light seemed to linger in her vision like an afterimage of the sun. The rescue operation continued below, their voices growing fainter as she ascended. Cloudwalker could hear them marveling at the baby's perfect health despite hours in the deadly cold. The indigenous woman, who Cloudwalker now recognized as a medicine woman from the summer ceremonies, was explaining to the others about the ancient legends of guardian spirits. The bear understood that what had happened in that cave would become part of something larger than herself, a story that would be passed down through generations. The passage eventually opened onto a sheltered ledge high up the mountainside, where the storm's fury had lessened. From this vantage point, Cloudwalker could see lines of snowmobiles and rescue vehicles converging on the river below, their lights cutting through the darkness like earthbound stars. The storm was beginning to clear, and the first rays of dawn painted the snow-covered landscape in shades of rose and gold. But something else caught the bear's attention: movement in the trees near her old den. Using her renewed strength, Cloudwalker made her way down the mountain's far side, drawn by an inexplicable feeling. As she approached her den, she heard sounds that made her heart skip a beat, the unmistakable whimpers of bear cubs. There, in the shelter of her cave's entrance, huddled two tiny cubs, their fur still wet from birth. Their mother lay nearby, her breathing shallow and weak. Cloudwalker recognized her, a young bear she had seen in her territory during the fall. The mother bear's eyes met Cloudwalker's, filled with desperate pleading. The dying bear had somehow found Cloudwalker's den in her time of need, guided perhaps by the same ancient forces that had led Cloudwalker to Denahi. Without hesitation, Cloudwalker moved forward to nuzzle the weakened mother, understanding passing between them. The young bear's eyes closed for the last time, knowing her cubs would be protected. Cloudwalker gently gathered the orphaned cubs, carrying them into the warmth of her den. As she settled down to warm and nurse them, she felt the weight of destiny in this moment. High above, an aurora began to dance across the clearing sky, its colors reminiscent of the pendant's mysterious glow. Cloudwalker could hear the distant sounds of the rescue party preparing to transport Denahi to safety, and the medicine woman's voice lifted in another ancient song. The bear looked down at her adopted cubs, now nursing contentedly, and understood the perfect symmetry of what had happened. She had saved a human child, and in return had been given a second chance at motherhood. The cubs, a male and female, had fur that gleamed with unusual silvery highlights, much like Cloudwalker's own coat. As they suckled, she could feel the same mysterious energy that had healed her wounds flowing between them, creating a bond as real as any blood tie. She knew that these cubs, born on this magical night, would grow to be special, perhaps even spirit bears themselves. The cycle would continue, the ancient pact between humans and animals renewed through acts of compassion and sacrifice. As the weeks passed, Cloudwalker's den became a sacred place in the wilderness. The medicine woman, whose name was Dancing Snow, would sometimes leave small offerings of dried fish and herbs near the den's entrance, though she never approached too closely. She understood the delicate balance that needed to be maintained between the human and spirit worlds. The cubs grew quickly, their silvery fur marking them as different from ordinary bears. Cloudwalker named them in her own way, the female she thought of as Moonshadow, for her habit of playing in the moonlight, and the male she called River Voice, because his gentle rumbles reminded her of flowing water. The story of Denahi's rescue spread through the indigenous communities and beyond. The elders spoke of how the ancient prophecies had foretold of a time when the spirit bears would return, bridging the gap between humans and nature that had grown too wide in recent years. Dancing Snow became the keeper of this story, and she watched over Denahi as he grew, noting how he seemed to have a special connection with the wild things. Birds would land near him without fear, and even the wariest animals would pause to watch him pass. Cloudwalker often led her cubs to a high ridge overlooking the valley where Denahi's people lived. From this safe distance, she could sometimes catch glimpses of the boy toddling around under Dancing Snow's watchful eye. The wooden pendant still hung around his neck, occasionally catching the sunlight with an otherworldly gleam. On these days, Moonshadow and River Voice would sit unusually still, their silver-tipped fur shimmering as they watched the human child who was, in some mysterious way, their brother. The cubs showed unusual abilities as they grew. Moonshadow could walk through the deepest snow without leaving tracks when she chose, and River Voice had a way of calming other animals with just his presence. Cloudwalker recognized these traits from the oldest legends she had heard humans whisper around their fires, signs that her adopted cubs were indeed touched by ancient magic. She taught them everything she knew about surviving in the wilderness, but also about the importance of watching over the humans who still respected the old ways. One evening, as the northern lights danced overhead, Cloudwalker led her cubs to the thermal cave where she had saved Denahi. The place had become a sacred site for the indigenous people, though they visited rarely and with great respect. As the bears entered the cave, they found Dancing Snow waiting there with young Denahi, now 3 years old. Instead of fear, the boy's eyes lit up with recognition. The pendant around his neck began to glow softly, and both Moonshadow and River Voice moved forward to greet him as if they had known him all their lives. Dancing Snow sang the ancient songs as Denahi reached out to touch each bear's nose in turn, recreating the moment of connection from that stormy night years ago. The steam from the warm pools rose around them like spirits dancing, and for a moment, the boundary between the human and animal worlds seemed to disappear completely. Cloudwalker watched as her cubs played gently with the human child, their movements careful and deliberate despite their growing size and strength. In this moment, she understood that her choice to save Denahi had been more than just an act of compassion. It had been a catalyst for reawakening something ancient and powerful in these mountains. The song of the wolves echoed from somewhere in the valley below, but it was different now. Not a hunting call, but a recognition of the sacred ceremony taking place in the cave. Other animals had gathered outside, ravens perched on nearby trees, their usually raucous calls softened to gentle murmurs, and even the elusive mountain lions watched from distant ridges. The natural world itself seemed to be acknowledging the restoration of an ancient balance, a healing of the rift between humans and the wild. As the seasons turned, Denahi grew into a remarkable child who seemed to walk between two worlds. By his 7th winter, he could speak not only the languages of his people and the modern world, but also seemed to understand the subtle languages of the forest. Dancing Snow had taught him the old ways, showing him how to read the messages written in broken twigs, scattered leaves, and animal tracks. The pendant he wore had become more than just a carved piece of wood. It had grown into a physical manifestation of his unique connection to the wilderness. Cloudwalker's cubs had matured into magnificent bears, their silver-touched fur now gleaming like starlight on snow. Moonshadow had developed an uncanny ability to appear whenever lost hikers wandered too far into dangerous territory, leading them back to safety without ever being seen clearly. Those who caught glimpses of her spoke of a bear that seemed to fade in and out of the mist like a dream. River Voice had become known among all the forest creatures as a peacemaker, often appearing at the boundaries between predator and prey to maintain the delicate balance of the wilderness. One autumn day, as the first snow began to dust the mountains, Cloudwalker witnessed something extraordinary. She had taken her position on the familiar ridge overlooking the valley when she saw Denahi, now tall enough to reach her shoulder, walking alone into the forest. Dancing Snow watched from the village edge, her hands raised in blessing. The boy carried nothing but a small drum, his pendant glowing softly against his chest. As he walked deeper into the woods, animals began to emerge from their hiding places, not to flee, but to follow. First came the wolves, including descendants of the pack that had once fought Cloudwalker. They fell into step behind Denahi, their heads lowered in respect. Ravens swooped down from the trees to circle overhead, their calls softened to melodic whispers. A mountain lion emerged from the shadows, its usual solitary nature forgotten as it joined the growing procession. Even the smaller creatures, foxes, hares, and pine martens, appeared along the path, drawn by something ancient and powerful. Denahi began to play his drum, its rhythm matching the heartbeat of the forest itself. The sound seemed to awaken something in the land, calling forth memories of a time when humans and animals had lived in closer harmony. Cloudwalker felt the vibrations in her bones, and beside her, Moonshadow and River Voice began to sway in response to the ancient rhythm. The boy's path led directly to the thermal cave where his life had been saved on that stormy night 7 years ago. As the procession neared the cave, Dancing Snow's voice rose in song from the valley below, carrying the ancient words up through the trees. Other voices joined hers, the elders of the village, their songs weaving together with Denahi's drumbeat and the natural sounds of the forest. The air itself seemed to shimmer with power, and Cloudwalker watched in amazement as the northern lights appeared in the daylight sky, their colors rippling like waves across the heavens. At the cave entrance, Denahi stopped playing. In the sudden silence, he raised his hands in a gesture that Cloudwalker recognized from her own memories of that fateful night. The pendant around his neck blazed with golden light, illuminating the faces of all the gathered creatures. Through some miracle of the moment, Cloudwalker could understand the words he spoke, not just as sounds, but as clear meanings that resonated in her heart. He spoke of the covenant between humans and animals, of the sacred duty to protect and respect each other, and of the magic that still lived in the wild places of the world. The boy's voice carried the weight of ages, as if the spirits of all the shamans and wisdom keepers who had come before were speaking through him. He told of Cloudwalker's choice on that winter night, how a mother's love had transcended the boundaries between species and awakened ancient powers that had lain dormant for generations. As he spoke, the gathered animals lifted their voices in their own ways, wolf song, bear rumble, bird cry, and cat scream, creating a harmony that had not been heard in these mountains for centuries. Something extraordinary began to happen as the harmonious chorus of animal voices filled the air. The thermal cave, which had always emanated warmth and ancient power, started to pulse with a visible energy that matched the rhythm of Denahi's heartbeat. The carved wooden pendant around his neck lifted on its own, floating at eye level as its glow intensified. Cloudwalker watched in amazement as similar lights began to appear around Moonshadow and River Voice, their silver-touched fur now radiating with an inner luminescence that transformed them into living embodiments of the northern lights. Dancing Snow arrived at the cave entrance, her breath visible in the increasingly charged air. She carried with her an ancient scroll, its surface covered in symbols that seemed to move and shift in the strange light. The medicine woman began to read from it in the old language, her voice weaving through the animal chorus like a golden thread through a tapestry. As she read, images formed in the steam rising from the thermal pools. Pictures of the first covenant between humans and animals, of spirit bears who had guided and protected the people through countless generations, and of the moment when Cloudwalker had made her fateful choice to save a human child. The images showed more than just the past. They revealed how that single act of compassion had set in motion a cascade of changes throughout the forest. Cloudwalker saw how her adopted cubs, Moonshadow and River Voice, had been chosen by the ancient spirits to help restore balance to a world that had grown too divided. The visions showed them guiding lost hikers, calming frightened animals, and maintaining the delicate peace between the human and natural worlds. Each act of kindness and protection had strengthened the renewed bond, creating a web of harmony that spread far beyond these mountains. Dennehy stepped forward, his young face reflecting wisdom far beyond his years. The floating pendant began to spin, creating a spiral of golden light that expanded outward to touch each gathered animal in turn. As the light reached them, their eyes began to glow with the same inner fire, and Cloudwalker realized they were all being bound together in a new kind of partnership. This was not the fearful dominion of humans over nature, nor the complete separation that modern life had created, but rather a restoration of the ancient understanding that all living things were connected in a sacred circle of life. The boy began to speak again, but now his voice carried the echoes of countless generations. He spoke of how Cloudwalker's love for her lost cubs had opened her heart to a human child, and how that love had awakened something that had been sleeping in the land itself. The thermal cave, he explained, had always been a gateway between the physical and spirit worlds, and now it was becoming active once more. Through this gateway, the wisdom of the ancient spirit bears could once again flow into the world, helping to heal the wounds that had grown between humanity and nature. Moonshadow and River Voice moved to stand on either side of Dennehy, their massive forms dwarfing the boy, but their presence entirely gentle. Cloudwalker watched as her cubs touched their noses to the spinning pendant, causing it to burst into a shower of golden sparks that settled on every creature present. Each spark that landed seemed to awaken something, a deeper awareness, a stronger connection to the ancient magic that still lived in these mountains. The wolf's eyes now held a new intelligence, the raven's feathers shimmered with otherworldly patterns, and even the smallest creatures seemed somehow more than they had been before. Dancing Snow continued reading from the scroll, but now the symbols lifted off its surface, dancing in the air like fireflies before merging with the steam from the thermal pools. They formed intricate patterns that Cloudwalker recognized as a kind of writing, not in any human language, but in the original language of nature itself, the one that all creatures had once understood. As each symbol found its place in the air, the gathered animals began to remember this ancient way of communicating, this deeper understanding that transcended the barriers between species. The medicine woman's voice rose to a crescendo, and suddenly Cloudwalker felt a surge of energy course through her body. Memories that were not her own flooded her mind, memories of other spirit bears who had watched over these mountains since the beginning of time. She saw through their eyes the long history of this place, the countless times that bears like herself had chosen to help humans in need, and how each act of compassion had strengthened the bridge between worlds. She understood now that she was part of an unbroken line of guardians, chosen not just to protect the wilderness, but to help maintain the delicate balance between all living things. The waves of energy emanating from the thermal cave began to spread outward through the land like ripples on a still pond. Cloudwalker felt the changes first in the way the very air seemed to shimmer with renewed vitality. The ancient magic, awakened by Dennehy's ceremony and the gathering of the animals, traveled along paths that had lain dormant for generations, paths that connected all living things in ways that modern humans had forgotten. In the valleys below, trees that had stood silent for centuries began to whisper their old songs again. Cloudwalker watched as their branches swayed in patterns that told stories of seasons long past, of bears and humans who had walked in harmony beneath their boughs. The eldest pines, their bark thick with age, glowed with a faint inner light that pulsed in rhythm with the earth's heartbeat. Their deep roots carried the renewed magic through underground networks that stretched far beyond the mountains. Animals from distant regions began to arrive, drawn by an instinctive knowledge that something momentous was occurring. Herds of caribou appeared on the horizon, their antlers crowned with dancing lights that matched the aurora above. Great eagles descended from their high mountain eyries, their wing beats creating patterns of wind that carried messages across vast distances. Even the salmon in the rivers below seemed to shine with a new awareness as they swam, their scales reflecting more than just moonlight. Dancing Snow explained to Denahi how the awakening was spreading through the indigenous networks that connected various tribes and peoples. Word traveled of animals acting as guides and protectors once again, of children who could speak with ravens, of elders whose ancient stories were proving to be more than just legends. The medicine woman received messages from other healers and wisdom keepers across the land, all reporting the same phenomenon. The veil between the human and natural worlds was becoming thin once more. Moonshadow and River Voice began to teach other bears the old ways, showing them how to access the ancient knowledge that ran in their blood. Cloudwalker observed as her cubs demonstrated the art of dreamwalking, entering the space between sleeping and waking where human and animal spirits could meet and communicate. Under their guidance, ordinary bears began to show signs of transformation, their fur taking on subtle silvery highlights that marked them as touched by spirit magic. The thermal cave became a gathering place for those who sought to understand the changes occurring in the world. Dancing Snow established a school of the old ways there, teaching young ones from various tribes how to read the signs and songs of nature. Cloudwalker would often watch from hidden vantage points as children learned to interpret the patterns in steam rising from the warm pools or practice the ancient art of speaking with stones and trees. But perhaps the most profound change was happening in the hearts of those who had long forgotten their connection to the natural world. People from distant cities began to experience strange dreams of bears with silver-touched fur leading them through snow-covered forests. Others reported mysterious encounters with animals that seemed to possess an almost human understanding. The boundary between civilization and wilderness started to blur, not through the expansion of human development, but through the reawakening of ancient bonds. Denahi's pendant had become a key to unlocking similar artifacts that had been preserved by indigenous peoples across the land. Each carved piece, long thought to be merely decorative, began to pulse with its own inner light. Together, they formed a network of spiritual waypoints, marking places where the connection between humans and nature remained strongest. Cloudwalker understood that these points of power were helping to stabilize the renewed bonds, ensuring that this awakening would not fade away like morning mist in the sun. The wolf pack that had once fought Cloudwalker became guardians of the thermal cave, their descendants now marked with strange patterns in their fur that glowed like starlight. They worked in partnership with Moonshadow and River Voice to maintain the delicate balance of the forest, ensuring that both animals and humans respected the ancient boundaries and laws. Their howls carried new meanings now, complex messages that could be understood by those who had ears to hear the old languages. As winter settled once again over the mountains, Cloudwalker stood on her familiar ridge and surveyed the changed landscape below. The world was different now, transformed by that single act of compassion she had shown on a stormy night. Yet she knew this was just the beginning. The true test would come in teaching both humans and animals how to live in this renewed world of connection and understanding. The bear's heart swelled with pride as she watched her cubs guiding others along the path she had unknowingly opened, leading all creatures toward a future where the ancient harmony could flourish once more. The years flowed like a river through the mountains, carving new channels of understanding between the human and natural worlds. Denahi grew into a young man of 16, his presence in the forest as natural as the ancient pines themselves. The pendant he wore had become an integral part of him, its glow now perfectly matched to his heartbeat. Cloudwalker, though touched by the silver of age, remained a powerful presence in the wilderness, her wisdom growing deeper with each passing season. Moonshadow and River Voice had become legendary figures in their own right, their influence extending far beyond the boundaries of their mountain home. Moonshadow had developed an extraordinary ability to weave dreams, entering the sleep of troubled humans to help them rediscover their connection to the natural world. Those who experienced her dream walking spoke of walking through forests of starlight, understanding for the first time the ancient language that bound all living things together. River Voice had become a keeper of boundaries, maintaining the delicate balance between the human world and the wild places that needed to remain untouched. His roar could calm storms, and his presence alone was enough to guide humans away from sacred spaces they weren't yet ready to understand. Dancing Snow's school of ancient wisdom had grown into a respected center of learning, drawing students from indigenous communities across the continent. The thermal cave, now known as the Gateway of Spirits, had expanded naturally through the years, its warm chambers creating perfect spaces for both teaching and communion with the spirit world. Cloudwalker would often observe the classes from hidden alcoves, her heart swelling with pride as she watched Denahi share the knowledge he had gained through his unique position between worlds. One particular autumn evening, as the northern lights danced across the sky with unprecedented brilliance, something remarkable occurred. A group of young bears, trained by Moon Shadow and River Voice, underwent their final transformation into spirit bears. Cloudwalker watched as their fur began to shimmer with silver light, marking them as the next generation of guardians. Each bear had shown a different gift. Some could speak to the winds, others could heal injured creatures with a touch, and a few showed the ability to cross between the physical and spirit worlds as easily as stepping through a curtain of mist. Denahi stood at the center of the ceremony, his drum creating rhythms that seemed to echo from the beginning of time. The patterns he played told the story of that winter night when Cloudwalker had made her choice to save him. But now the story had grown to encompass all the changes that had flowed from that single act of compassion. As he drummed, images formed in the air around him. Bears leading lost children to safety, wolves protecting human settlements from natural disasters, ravens carrying messages between distant communities, all working together to restore the ancient harmony. The knowledge preserved by Dancing Snow's people had begun to spread in unexpected ways. Scientists who came to study the unusual phenomena in the region found their rigid worldviews transformed by what they witnessed. Many became bridges themselves, finding ways to translate the ancient wisdom into terms the modern world could understand and accept. They spoke of quantum entanglement when describing the connection between all living things, and of complex ecological networks when explaining the ways animals and humans could communicate across traditional barriers. Cloudwalker's own role had evolved beyond that of a mere guardian. She had become a teacher of teachers, sharing her wisdom with both bears and humans, who showed the potential to carry forward the renewed covenant between worlds. Her encounters with humans were rare but profound, occurring only when the need was greatest or when ancient prophecies needed to be fulfilled. Each meeting left an indelible mark on those fortunate enough to experience it, their lives forever changed by the deep wisdom they glimpsed in her ancient eyes. The forest itself had become a living testament to the power of restored harmony. Trees that had once been silent now sang with the passing of each season. The very rocks thrummed with the energy of ancient stories, and streams carried messages in their ripples that those with awakened hearts could read. Even the smallest creatures, the mice, the insects, the birds, played their parts in maintaining the renewed balance, each one a thread in the vast tapestry of interconnected life.